So, distinguished colleagues and friends, I bring you greetings from Germany. This international colloquium for the advancement of conversational thinking is hosted at the Center for Interdisciplinary and Intercultural Studies, University of Tubingen, Germany, in collaboration with the Decoloniality Research Group, University of Pretoria, South Africa, and the Conversational Society of Philosophy. So I thank the management of these institutions and the elements of the Conversational Society of Philosophy at the base and at the frontier. The colloquium will begin with a keynote, which also doubles as the CSP 5th Distinguished Academic Lecture Series, to be presented by Professor C.K. Raju of the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies. We are well aware that the CSP Distinguished Academic Lecture Series is a platform for regional and radical ideas. And Professor Raju has made a global name for himself for being a vessel for ideas that are not only considered new in the academia, but radical as well. Many of his talks have questioned the foundation and the assumptions, accepted norms in fields such as mathematics, physics, philosophy, computer science, etc. We invite you all to brace for impact as he delivers a lecture titled Euclid Must Fall, the Pythagorean Theorem, and the Rant of Racists and Civilizational Superiority. It promises to be yet another earth-shaking talk that challenges the order of knowledge as we know it in Western modernity. And I say thank you for joining us from different parts of the world, and let the conversation begin. Thank you very much, and back to you, Dr. Arabia.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jonathan, for that inspiring and riveting welcome remark. I'll now invite Dr. Niels Whiteman to also give his opening remarks. He is the director of the Center for Interdisciplinary and Intercultural Studies in Germany. Dr. Niels.
Well, thank you, Dr. Arabia. I'm glad to see you all here this morning. Welcome to this nice workshop, and particularly warm welcome to Professor Raju. I'm very much looking forward to your keynote lecture in just a minute.
Introduce our keynote speaker to give us a brief bio of our keynote speaker before he gives his talk. Dr. Jonathan.
Thank you very much, moderator, Dr. Arabia Ato. It is my pleasure and privilege to introduce our keynote lecturer for this colloquium, who also doubles as our 5th Distinguished Academic Lecturer, which is a program of the Conversational Society of Philosophy that provides platform for original and radical ideas. He is Professor C.K. Raju and holds a doctorate from the Indian Statistical Institute, Kolkata, preceded by a master's in mathematics and a bachelor's of science in physics from Mumbai University in India. In his academic career, he has taught formal mathematics and researched in theoretical physics for several years at different universities, playing a key role eventually in the building of India's first parallel supercomputer. He has advanced many revolutionary ideas in mathematics, physics, philosophy, history of science, and of course in different areas of intellectual history. He has published several books and numerous articles in learned international journals. In 2010, he received the prestigious TGA Award in Hungary for correcting an error made by the famous Albert Einstein and others in the field of physics. He has long been a professor of mathematics and computer science in various universities in India and abroad, but has diverse interests and was editor of the Journal of Indian Council of Philosophical Research at some point. For the last decade, he has been working on decolonization of mathematics and science, and designed and taught decolonized courses at some institutions. He's an internationally renowned scholar, has given countless talks across different universities in 6 continents. Professor C.K. Raju is not an anonymous scholar in mathematics, physics, philosophy, computer science, and what have you. He is really a sort of Indian's own Aristotle, having the ability to profess at different disciplines at the highest level possible. We are privileged to have Professor C.K. Raju in our midst today to give the opening keynote lecture of this colloquium and the 5th distinguished academic lecture series of the CSP. May I humbly and happily invite Professor C.K. Raju to deliver his talk. Thank you very much. And welcome, Professor.
Namaskar. Thank you very much, Dr. Jonathan, Professor Whiteman. I am very happy to be part of this colloquium, and I hope that my ideas are not too radical. So let me start right away because I have a lot to say, and I hope that I have enough time. So the topic, as you must have seen, is about Euclid must fall. It's obviously a takeoff from Rhodes must fall. But let me give you some background. So about 30 years ago, I was part of a group of influential Indian intellectuals decided we need to tell our own stories. You can't just remain as characters trapped in another person's story. And so my contribution to this was a new story of the calculus. And this was published in 2007, but of course there was a whole lot of work done before that. Basically, that calculus was invented in India, 5th to 14th century, with a different epistemology, right? That's important, that it is not the kind of epistemology which is given to it in standard university texts. I won't go into that, but I'm just pointing that out. Okay, so this has a different epistemology, and it was stolen by Cochin-based Jesuits in the 16th century and falsely attributed to Newton and Leibniz. I will give a slide on Leibniz subsequently. But the point is that neither of them fully understood the calculus and its infinite series. So there is an article that I have recently written on Marx and mathematics, illustrating my epistemic test and explaining why Newton did not understand the calculus, and of course Leibniz did not understand the series attributed to him. So then the realization came that a new story is not enough. You also need a new way to teach. And so I started teaching courses on decolonized calculus without limits. Started off in India. So this was the first course in Sarnath. Like the Buddha, started my journey there. Then it was in Malaysia. And so this was published long back in 2011. This report on how I was teaching calculus to students there. Then in Iran, we had this for social scientists in India, and also for engineering students. much more recently. So it has been tried out. The teaching has been tried out. But the point is, this was very strongly opposed by formal mathematicians and the story of Euclid. So I have been contesting this for quite some time. There was this article long ago on Goodbye Euclid. I gave a talk on it in University Science Malaysia, and there's a video of that talk also available, Goodbye Euclid, which is there on my site. Now I think I will skip this, but it's taking a lot of time to load. Yeah, so this is the talk, and the Malaysian Deputy Minister for Education chaired the meeting. So this was quite interesting, but then it sort of petered out. But 10 years ago, I identified that we never examined the false history and bad philosophy of science that we have received, and that is the root cause of continued post-colonial Western academic hegemony. So this was my book that I wrote. There was a meeting in Iran on that. And after that, we organized a week-long meeting to teach the syllabus to devise a new curriculum for history and philosophy of science. And I taught it. Somebody's mic is on. So I taught this new decolonized course. As you can see, there were a lot of students, and they did practical things like measuring the radius of the Earth and so on, which are very old things. And there is also a video of students' reactions if you want to see it. But there is a video of it. It's just a 2-minute video, but I can't show it to you right now. You can check all these out. I'll put up the presentation. Now, 5 years ago, during the Rhodes Must Fall agitation, I visited Pretoria, the University of South Africa, and talked on my experiences with decolonizing mathematics, how to teach calculus differently and so on. Now, this talk seems to have frightened some white racists. And one of them, she wrote that blacks and women are bad at math, and that to in quotes, decolonize math, one must teach them to think like the dead white men, like Euclid, who supposedly created the subject of mathematics. And I wrote an article that Europeans, including early Greeks, were backward even in basic arithmetic until the 16th century. And they could not have invented math, and that Euclid was anyway a black woman, as shown in the cover of my 2012 book, Euclid and Jesus. So this is the book. And I'm making this, I put this forward very seriously, this hypothesis, and I'm willing to defend it if somebody wants to discuss it. Anyway, this was published in the Conversation. It went viral. It was reproduced worldwide, and then it was censored worldwide. It was censored. Now the question is, why was it censored? You can read this article. It's available online on Science 2.0. Just Google, was Euclid a black woman? Point is, why was it censored? See, given that it had gone viral, why wasn't there a rebuttal? And there is an obvious reason for that. That the academic issue of the lack of evidence for Euclid was settled way back in 2002, when David Fowler, the leading Western authority on the history of Greek mathematics, admitted in response to a question about me that we know nothing about Euclid. Now, somebody asked, what is known about Euclid? He said, nothing. So nothing is known. But it's not only that nothing is known, there is plenty of counter evidence that Euclid was a black woman. And recently we had an international seminar, and I put up this on my blog, so you can search that out, where again this question was raised, what does it matter whether Euclid was a white man or a black woman? So that question is answered here. Okay, so I want to get into the politics of saving the Euclid myth. There are 3 types of vested interests. The first is that of white racists. And they want to claim that whites are superior since they created a superior kind of mathematics. That is precisely the point made by this lady who responded to my talk. Then there are formal mathematicians. The formal mathematics, which I call Western ethno-mathematics, is the superior way to teach mathematics, and that is something we follow in all our universities currently. That is how we teach mathematics. Then the third thing, and the unexpected thing, is church dogma. So I think very few people understand that the Euclid myth is essential to post-crusade church dogma, post-crusade church theology of reason. And I think that that is something which people need to understand, because it's something very deeply hidden. So, and the key point of today's talk is that these vested interests are interconnected. That church dogma is interconnected with formal mathematics, is interconnected with the claim of white superiority. And racism is actually about the sense of superiority, religious superiority, white superiority, Western superiority, not primarily about the color of the skin. And when I say Euclid must fall, it is meant to destroy that sense of superiority. Okay, so let me start with the question that, apartheid, segregation, slavery has gone on for 5 centuries. South Africa just got over a few years ago, less than a quarter century ago. Segregation continued for well over a century. Slavery of blacks in Americas, both Americas, went on from the 16th century until the 19th century. And today, racism still persists. I mean, the Rhodes Must Fall is a classic example, Peter Floyd and so on. I don't need to go into that. All of you are very familiar with that. Now, racism is cruel. It is ethically depraved. This has been much discussed. But I want to discuss something else. The belief that the color of the skin makes one human being superior to another is an exceptionally foolish belief. How did Westerners accept this exceptionally foolish belief for so long? 5 centuries we are talking about. There has to be something wrong, very wrong. And it's not only the common people. The common people do it okay, but top Western intellects like Immanuel Kant, Locke, and so on, they all accepted this foolish belief. The whole systems of ethics, law, and governance in the West, which are based on this foolish belief for centuries. So my question is, why were races collectively and individually so foolish? Western scholars have never asked this question. I don't know, I mean, why not? So the reason I think is quite obvious. They're merely asking the question militates against the white Western sense of superiority. And that sense of superiority, rather than the color of the skin, is at the core of racism. Now, a persistent and foolish belief, it has persisted for more than 5 centuries, is a superstition. All right. And in the West, the church is the key source of superstitions. So, for example, you have I suppose all of you are familiar with this, the Bible defense of slavery, which was just before the, just before the so-called Proclamation of Emancipation, just before the end of the Civil War in America. This was being widely circulated. So this is available online. And it was a very popular book, went into 5 editions. That the black color of the skin is not due to the heat of the sun, but it is due to the curse of the Christian God, the curse of Kam. And I think you are all familiar with that, but this is a superstition. I just want to underline that. So the question again is, why were Westerners so foolish and superstitious for so long? And the question needs to be broadened. It's not appropriate to study slavery alone. You must study genocide and slavery. Genocide plus slavery. And in fact, the age of enlightenment, as it is called, should perhaps better be called the age of genocide plus slavery. And you must include the genocide, not only of blacks, but of indigenous people. You can't just say the genocide of the Red Indians or something separate from the genocide of the Maya, or the Inca, the Aztecs, or the Australian Aborigines. That's the principle of Occam's razor, that you have a simplicity of causes. And genocide is related to slavery even economically, that the genocide provided the free of cost land, slavery provided the free of cost labor, and of course in Australia convicts were used. So that is the basis of Western wealth. So the Europeans who engaged in genocide, the question is, did they lack moral compunctions? Did they have any? They did have. But the dominant morality at that time was church morality, and the church thought it moral to demand genocide or enslavement of all non-Christians. This is stated in the Bull Romanus Pontifex, and you can check this out, meaning of Christian discovery. Here is the Bull Romanus Pontifex, and so on, how this was that invade, search, capture, vanquish, subdue all Saracens and pagans and others, and reduce their persons to perpetual slavery and so on. It is quite a vicious document, and it is a papal bull. And this was the Bull Romanus Pontifex, which has never been withdrawn. Likewise, there was the Bull Inter Cetera, which declared that all non-Christians lost their right to land on being discovered by Christians, as upheld by the US Supreme Court. That's still the law in the US, and you can find the reference in that article I just showed you. So it was the biggest hate crime in history, as described at first hand by Las Casas, Bartolome de las Casas, who accompanied Columbus on his second voyage. And then, you know, the things they said, that while there, you offspring of the devil, etc. It was a religious hate crime and not anything to do with race. And the criminals thought they were being moral because they were only imitating what God would do in hell. So this makes it clear that in the 15th and 16th century, genocide and slavery were justified using religion, no mention of race anywhere. So we have a new answer to the question raised, for example, by Theodore Allen. What came first, whiteness or slavery? It's the sense of superiority which came first, based on Christian church dogma that Christians are superior and ought to kill and enslave non-Christians. And that was the initial ground. Now, this moral justification ran into trouble after the transatlantic slave trade, when many Black Africans converted to Christianity. And that is when they shifted to the curse of Ham, that Blacks are inferior Christians. But why use the color of the skin? Well, that was an inquisitional practice. So the Inquisition, the inquisitors had earlier used quick visual cues, such as adherence to Moorish dress, to spot suspect Christian converts among the Moor, and of course, subject them to all kinds of inhumane tortures. So the biblical justification was thin. So if we look at Immanuel Kant, he uses a different secular justification for his recommendation to whip blacks. He echoed Hume that blacks are not creative. But my question is, would Kant and Hume have used this argument if they believed George James? George James' stolen legacy, I mean, not in the sense that Aristotle literally plagiarized from the great library of Alexandria, but that Greek philosophy is derived from Egyptian. It could be due to translations from Egyptian and Persian. So I don't know if you have seen this. This is from the Sacred Books of the East, volume 37. It is the Dinkard. So the evil, destined villain Alexander, he translated the Zendavesta into Greek. That is what it says. And he burnt many of the texts. So this process has been going on. But there were later appropriations motivated by racist historians, as in Bernard's Black Athena. There could be even simpler accretion into later date texts. For example, there are no primary sources for Archimedes. So I'm quoting David Fowler. We possess no original versions of any Greek mathematical text. And the only thing that we have got is something which was reconstructed in the 19th century from some texts which were lost in the 16th century. So there are no sources. These are all conjectures. All conjectures and about what Archimedes did. And the point is, this is based on accretion. If you have a 16th century scientific text, it reflects 16th century scientific knowledge, because scientific texts are updated. You don't just keep doing it for historical reasons. You do it for practical value. And then I had given 5 lectures in Pretoria on Not Out of Greece. All these things are covered there. I'll simply summarize. When the church first incorporated the myth of Christian superiority into its dogma, it also created a secular justification using false history. And Orosio's history against the pagans is the prime example. And this trick went ballistic during the Crusades, after the Crusades, when a false history of science was concocted. And it was difficult to win the Crusades. It went on for 5 centuries because the Muslim Europe particularly was scientifically far ahead of Christian Europe. Today is Eid Mubarak, by the way, if there are any Muslims around. So the church appropriated all scientific knowledge in Arabic texts, and to make it theologically correct, because the church had earlier burnt all books, it attributed them to early Greeks. Why? Because Greeks were declared as the sole friends of Christians, so they made it, that made it a Christian inheritance, just this attribution. Whether you have evidence for it or not, people did not ask during the Crusades. And the myth of Euclid is precisely such a myth with no evidence whatsoever. There is no primary Greek text which has Euclid's name in it. It is well known. It's simply not there. Now, you have zero evidence, and Euclides could mean rational geometry, a possible subtitle, and there is plenty of counter evidence. As I think I showed you this book already, my book Euclid and Jesus. You can read that. It summarizes everything. It's available on Kindle Unlimited. Just take a look. So Euclid was appropriated. The interesting point is this appropriation was done for reasons related to church dogma. I'll come back to that. So the shift from religious superiority to racist superiority saw a corresponding adjustment that Greeks were now portrayed as whites, as they still are, rather than as friends of Christians. Now I want to go to Du Bois' dream, because I think you need to expand the question further. Du Bois in his Dark Princes realized that you have to include colonialism. And his dream was that colonized were equally oppressed. So he thought of uniting all the colonized against the oppressor and thus freeing them. And after the collapse of colonialism following World War II and the collapse of the idea of a unipolar world given the rise of China, that dream is no longer a romance, but a realistic possibility. And what I want to emphasize is that false history is a key element of both racist and colonial claims of superiority, as for example, put forward by Macaulay in India about the colonizer being immensely superior. But racist history further mutated after colonialism, given the wild conjectures about the Aryan race grew after William Jones' 1786 linguistic observation, and that led to the belief that the colonized were of the same race as the mythical Aryans as the colonizer. And so the claim of racist superiority further mutated into a claim of civilizational superiority. So this is what I'm saying. It started off with the idea of Christian superiority. After the transatlantic slave trade, there was the conversion of blacks, and that led ultimately to the idea of white superiority. And after colonialism and the Aryan race conjecture, that led to the idea of Western superiority. But it's all based on false history. Okay. So these are not the only two models. You know, it's not just the Crusades and so on. There's the Inquisitional model. For example, Copernicus. You know, after the fall of the Constantinople, Istanbul, a whole lot of Byzantine Greek texts came to Europe. And Copernicus, who translated one such text available in the Vatican Library, was declared as the originator. And he had to hide it because he was afraid of the Inquisition. And that's a big story of Copernican revolution. Likewise, the doctrine of Christian discovery was applied not only to land, but also to knowledge. The first Christian discoverer becomes the owner of that knowledge. And that is how the discovery of calculus is attributed to Newton and Leibniz. And let me, as I said, well, since we are in Germany, let me explain this Leibniz series, so-called. This is found in an Indian text called the Yukti Bhasha. It is Yukti Deepika, I'm sorry. This is the Sanskrit slok. I want it is translated in my book. But this is the mathematical translation. It's an infinite series. for pi, and this is precisely what is called the Leibniz series. And why do I say that nobody understood it? Because nobody, neither Leibniz, nor Galileo, nor Descartes, nor Newton, nor Berkeley, knew how to sum an infinite series. All right, this was the major problem, and that was the epistemological problem regarding the calculus in Europe. And as I said, it was transmitted by Cochin-based Jesuits. And please take a look at this epistemic test. I think I showed this to you already. Okay. So, all right. Since I want to focus on philosophy, I would like to not go further into history because it will take a lot of time. And let me go into the philosophical aspects. Point is that bad history results in bad philosophy. So Kant's ethical conclusion that blacks, since not creative, should be whipped into silence, it's a bad ethical conclusion. So bad philosophy based on bad history. And so to bring out how obnoxious this conclusion is actually, I mean, we could ask, should Kant's followers be whipped into silence? I'm sure a lot of people are going to protest, but that is a logical thing to ask. So anyway, the false myth of Euclid results in a bad philosophy of mathematics. And this false myth is not confined to who is the author of a particular book. That's not the most important issue. The issue is about the contents of the book. And you would imagine there can be no controversy about the contents of the book. The book has been known for 500 years, 700 years. And one would imagine that somebody actually read the book. But the myth is about the contents of the book. That on the myth, the book first gave axiomatic proofs in geometry. It's completely false. If the book Elements does not have a single axiomatic proof. And let me just clarify what is an axiom. An axiom is a postulate and an assumption, not a self-evident truth. There's no such thing as a self-evident truth. And the definition of an axiomatic proof is that it is a sequence of propositions in which each proposition is either an axiom or is derived from preceding propositions by some rule of reasoning. It could be various rules of reasoning. For example, classic, so to say, Aristotelian rule is A implies B, therefore B. The important point here is that facts are excluded and observations are also excluded. Anything empirical is excluded. That is to say, I cannot say A is a fact, therefore A. I cannot say I observe A, therefore A. So that's the difference between formal and normal reasoning. That axiomatic or formal reasoning is reasoning minus facts. It differs from normal or scientific reasoning, which was used worldwide, which is reasoning with facts. So let's take the normal inference that the earth is round. Now the 5th century Aryabhat, he said that the earth is round. It's a sphere which stands supportless in space. All right, like a kadam flower, it's a round flower. So he explained. What did he explain? I mean, this is the Shishadi Vriddhit, as it is called. It is too complicated to write in English with diacriticals. And maybe you can take a look at this article, which gives the translation of Shishadi Vriddhit 2036. If the earth is level, why can't tall trees be seen? When they are at very great distance, as you know, ships disappear over the horizon. So these are the arguments that were given, very simple, down-to-earth arguments for the earth being round. So it was an inference. Point I'm making is nobody went to space and saw it. It was inferred from the fact that far-off trees cannot be seen. But it was inferred from a fact, not an axiom. You observe that far-off trees cannot be seen. And therefore, you infer that the earth is round. Okay? Or you infer that the horizon is circular, and that's the added thing. I have not added that. Likewise, there is a normal proof of the Pythagorean theorem from the Yukti Bhasha. So this is how the proof goes. Here you have one square based on one side, and then on top of it, you put the square based on the other side. One is called Bhuj, the other is called Koti. And now you measure out the Bhuj. That is an empirical process, measuring it out. You cut it here and you draw this. And you cut this triangle like this, you cut this triangle like this, rotate it like that. rotate that like this, and you can see that the sum of these two squares is equal to the square on the diagonal. But the point is, this is a proof, but it is not a formal proof because it includes empirical elements. I can see that this is the case. I have to move things in space. I have to worry about rigid motions and so on. So it involves a diagram and so on, and you're superposing. Superposition is the problem. And you observe that the two areas are equal. Now with normal reasoning, the point is, if you are using empirical facts, the order of the propositions is not critically important. So the Yukti Bhasha, in the Yukti Bhasha, the Pythagorean proposition is the first proposition, not the last as it is in the elements. So on the Euclid myth, the Euclid's primary contribution was the arrangement of the propositions, the order of the propositions in the elements, so that the proof of each proposition depended only on the preceding propositions. But now the strange thing is 750 years of European myth about mathematics. Extraordinary. The book was a prescribed text. Nobody read it. All right. It is repeated. The myth is repeated that there are axiomatic proofs in the elements in the foolish Cambridge exam regulation towards the end of the 19th century for the previous and local examinations. So I have put it up on my website that this is what they said. Proofs other than Euclid's will be admitted, but Euclid's axioms will be required, and no proof of any proposition will be accepted which assumes anything not proved in the preceding propositions in Euclid. Okay, you must stick to the order of in which the propositions in Euclid occur. That is mandatory. It is part of the exam regulations. It is something passed by the University of Cambridge. So all the dons must have read it. And this is after 750 years of seeing this book. So please take a look. This is on my website. I've given you the link and I will give it to you again. It's publicly posted. So why do I call this foolish? Because nobody read the book. Amazing fact, in 750 years, they had this myth and nobody read the book because there are no axiomatic proofs in the elements. And as a matter of fact, the more laughable thing is that the text which was prescribed by Cambridge had all empirical proofs. That text is also put up on my website. You can check it out. So the book Elements has no axiomatic proofs, not of the first proposition, not of the last. So the first proposition is about drawing an equilateral triangle on a given line segment. So you take the compass, put it here, draw one arc, take another compass, and take the same radius, the compass, put the center here, and draw another arc, and where they intersect, you join. And that would be an equilateral triangle. But the point is, you see that these arcs intersect. How do you know that they intersect? How do you know it axiomatically? You don't know. So there is no, even of the first proposition, there is no axiomatic proof. And likewise, there is no proposition, or there is no axiomatic proof of proposition 4, the side angle side theorem, where you have two triangles which have equal sides. And if the word is equal, by the way, in the elements, not congruent, that was a word later introduced by Hilbert. So you take the one triangle, put it on top of another triangle, you superpose, and you see, you observe that they are equal, and therefore you conclude that this proposition holds. But this empirical process, this is an empirical process, not allowed in formal mathematics. So if you don't believe me and you won't read the book, then you know, it is something very strange that all Europeans fail to carefully read this prescribed text and even its first proposition in 750 years. I mean, it's an amazing record. So here is the colonial proof. So what is the colonial proof? The colonial proof is that you must have Western authorities. Western authorities must say something, only then it is credible. We don't have the capacity to check it ourselves. That is something very sad. And anyway, let me give you that proof. Dedekind, Russell, and Hilbert, what they had to say. So Dedekind tried to correct the proof of proposition 1 using what are called Dedekind cuts, which later came to be known as formal real numbers. Russell wrote that the proof of proposition 4 is a tissue of nonsense. So I'll give you this text on the teaching of Euclid by Russell. So the fourth proposition is a tissue of nonsense because it is using superposition, and superposition is an empirical process, and Russell is absolutely not happy with that. So tissue of nonsense. David Hilbert, he wrote a whole book, Foundations of Geometry. So this was in 1898, 99 maybe, finalized in 99. So I have the book here on this link, but I won't go into that. It's available online and it's available on my site. So the point is, Hilbert's aim was to provide the axiomatic proofs missing in Euclid, and of course the missing axioms. And of course in the process he completely changed the book. It is synthetic geometry, no length measurements are allowed. And if you are interested in further mathematical details, please join my geometry workshop next month. Today my talk concerns racism and the related underlying political claim, so I will come back to that. That this is a civilizationally superior form of mathematics, axiomatic mathematics. I want to come back to that it's not civilizationally superior. So it is based on a false claim of Euclid and his purported axiomatic proofs which don't exist. And the point is that this false claim of superiority is still being peddled in Indian school texts, in Wikipedia and so on. It is being peddled by reputed Western historians, the top Western historians, Needham, Gillings, Claggett. 100 years after it has been publicly exposed to be complete nonsense. They won't read and they won't listen to this. They just stick to the myth. Now, what do you call such a person? They won't listen to, they won't read, they won't look at facts. They will go by the big myth. So you call them gradients. So complete disregard of easily verifiable facts, which have been publicly admitted over a century ago, that there are no axiomatic proofs. This entitles them to the title of gradients. And why am I using this? Because Claggett said the Egyptians did not know the Pythagorean theorem, and anybody who says is a pyramidiot. So I think that it deserves to be returned, the compliment, and people need to be called gradients, and there are far too many of them. But the prize, the gradients prize goes to Lefkowitz. So if you recall, Shekanta Dio pointed out that the Ames, the Rhine papyrus, problem 41. So this is the problem 41. I don't really understand Egyptian, so I can just show it to you, but I won't, I will just give you what the translation is. If you question the translation, and I will leave it to you to decide. It has the right formula for the volume of a cylindrical granule. And that formula is very simple. Take the diameter, subtract diameter by 9, square it. And that gives you the right formula and the right value of pi, which is approximately 3.16. Recall also that the sphere and cylinder is attributed to Archimedes, a book called Sphere and Cylinder, based on accretive sources from after the 16th century, reconstructed in the racist 19th century. But Lefkowitz, see what she asserts. She says, not out of Africa, page 153, that Archimedes determined that the volume of the cylinder was 3/2 the area of the sphere. My goodness. So comparing volumes and areas and based on 16th century text, but let's get back to the mainline story. Dedekind, Hilbert, Russell rejected the myth of axiomatic proofs, but they accepted the superstition that axiomatic proofs are superior. They all tried to provide axiomatic proofs. Russell wrote his Principia Mathematica. Hilbert had his foundations of geometry, foundations of mathematics, and so on. So the question, are axiomatic formal proofs superior? And if they are superior, for what purpose are they superior? To whom are they superior? So as I said, Euclid is Euclides, which is related to Akli Kalam or Islamic rational theology. So during the Crusades, when the church suddenly switched to Christian rational theology of reason, of Aquinas and schoolmen, why did it do that? Because they failed to convert Muslims by force the way Europe was converted to Christianity by force earlier. Because militarily, after the first crusade, all the remaining crusades were failures for centuries. Muslims could not be converted using the Bible either, but they accepted the reason, as in the Islamic theology of reason, Islamic rational theology, which came from Ibn Rushd, which was taught as a textbook in Oxford and Cambridge for a long time. Ever Rus. So church too decided to adopt reason, but how? So they gave reason a Greek ancestry because there is no mention of reason in the Bible. But why? Isn't reason against church superstition? People keep talking of rationality these days. Rationality, let's be rational. But no, the unique thing discovered by the church was that, I have an article on that, the church connection to reason. So the link is here. I'll put it up. Please take a look at it. The point is, church facts go against church dogma, not reason alone. And Aquinas demonstrated it. So the church accepted reason minus facts. That's your formal reasoning. Reasoning, but based on axioms, not facts. That's the startling innovation made by the church. That the starting point of reasoning would be an axiom or assumption, not a fact. So Aquinas used this in his Summa Theologica. So how many angels can fit on a pin? That's the question he asks. And people will tell you this is not real. That they did not ask such questions. So here is the reference to Summa Theologica. How many angels can be there on a pin in the same place? Right? This is very much there in Summa Theologica. So take a look at it. And he starts on an axiom that angels occupy no space. And if angels occupy no space, there are no facts about angels. How do I know what the angels do, whether they have 4 wings or 5 or what they do, whether they dance on one leg or, you can assume anything you like. And you can prove whatever you want to prove. What you assume depends on what you want to prove. So formal reasoning greatly suited the church for its theology of reason and was hence glorified by the church. It was read into Euclid where it did not exist. And that hid the tricky church invention. Because it was a brazen misreading because there are no such proofs. But in fact, the book is full of figures which are not rigorous as Dedekind says, and they are logically worthless as Russell says. But the diagrams in the book relate to mathesis. And Rocklou specifically says that they relate to Plato's idea of mathesis as described in Meno. I won't go into that, I've shown it several times, but Phaedo. So let me just search for diagrams here. So what proofs are given of this doctrine of recollection? Mathesis is that the soul recollects its past lives, knowledge it has acquired in its past lives. Mathesis is learning. That is what learning is. All learning is recollection. So he says that this can be most clearly shown when you take a person to a diagram or to anything of that sort. So this is Plato, Phaedo, and you can likewise look at Meno, where he describes in great detail Socrates' dialogue with the slave boy, why geometry is related to the arousal of the soul. So that means that the elements was about mathesis, not about irrefragable proof, which was the point politically needed by the church. So it just modified the facts. And everybody believed for 750 years. That is what is most shocking. All the top minds of the West believed it. Without verifying, they still believe it. So the theorem proving mathematics is declared superior because it served the church's political purposes. But formal theorems are not superior in practical value. Unfortunately, because many people have the it works superstition. How can we change mathematics? It works. See, what works? So what works is normal mathematics. That has always worked. It's very ancient. Not Western formal math, which came after the Crusades. So Egyptians built pyramids long before that. How did they manage? Bridges were built before that by Incas, by Arabs, and so on. You do your groceries every day without knowing the formal proof of 1 + 1 = 2. And that ab initio formal proof in real numbers is my Cape Town challenge. Nobody has met it yet. What is the formal proof of 1 + 1 = 2? Russell takes 378 pages for integers. For real numbers, you need 1,000 pages. So you don't need it. Now, for practical purposes, like calculation of rocket trajectories, people want it for science. I have calculated rocket trajectories, right? What you do is you use a computer. You use normal math, all right? And formal, what does a computer do? It does not use real numbers. It uses floats. If you teach calculus in the university, all those fat calculus texts, they will say real numbers are essential for calculus. Okay, but trajectory calculations for rockets are done using computers which use floating point numbers, not real numbers. And those floating point numbers don't even obey the associative law for addition. And the calculus is made better if you use the Indian non-Archimedean arithmetic. But who lays down the axioms? Somebody in the West, and they follow them even in China. It's a very terrific irony. So the trick is to plant a superstition and make you obedient to and dependent on Western authority. And you have to understand that trick. The superstitions are not just about all sorts of angels and so on. Superstitions are also about mathematics. So formal theorems fail in real life because axioms and assumptions fail. And well, I gave an example of the associative law, but the Pythagorean theorem failed for the practical application to the European navigational problem. So you see what they did was they had a method of a ship was going, so they did not know how to measure longitude until the 18th century. So they heaved the log, they threw a log and measured its speed and calculated the distance. They checked out the latitude difference, and then they calculated the longitudinal difference and thus calculated the longitude. But this was a problem. It led to huge navigational disasters until the 18th century. Why? Because you're applying the, first of all, you're applying a Pythagorean calculation. I'll come to that. And this problem was recognized by governments. British Parliament legislated the longitude prize in 1713. Indians understood this long ago. No, why does the Pythagorean theorem fail? Because the sphericity of the earth. So you see, if you have a spherical triangle and so on, it's not going to obey this theorem that you're talking about. And this is explicitly stated in the Mahabhaskariya. I'll skip that, but it is there. The link will work. And the point is that the Pythagorean theorem, it's not good enough to say it's an approximation. That's an inadequate defense. Why is it an inadequate defense? Because an approximation is worthless without error bounds. You tell somebody, oh, you are approximately, near Berlin. What is approximate? Could be 1,000 miles, could be, 1,000 meters or whatever. So you must state your error bounds, and they are not available because the theorem is exact. It doesn't state what your error bounds for Pythagorean theorem are. And even if you were to state error bounds, you would need knowledge of the radius of the earth, which was not known to Europeans until the late 17th century. What you need is not the theorem, you need the calculation, Pythagorean calculation, all right? And what is the difference? You will say, your difference is that you are calculating square roots. And square roots were unknown to Greeks, but were known to early Egyptians, Iraqis, and Indians. I have an article on that, which is called Black Thoughts Matter. And there's a detailed discussion of that in this article in Journal of Black Studies. So the calculation of square root of 2 involves an infinite series, hence it is forever inexact. So inexact calculation versus proof of exact theorem, that is the thing that we're talking about. Normal math is always about inexact calculation, not about theorem proof. Now the last question I would like to ask is theorem proving even epistemically superior? And the reason given is that empirical proofs are fallible. That's true. Everybody accepts it. But the idea that deduction is infallible is a mere superstition. See how many superstitions underlying mathematics. Any math teacher knows that students are often and they submit wrong proofs all the time. Not just students, authorities to submit wrong proofs. They have published many wrong proofs. So deduction is far more fallible than empirical proof. And reasoning, basically the human mind is more fallible than the senses. So this is my article on Decolonizing Mathematics in this University of Durban journal. They called me for a keynote. So it's available for free. So please take a look. So I'm giving you a simple example. Game of chess is an exercise in pure deduction. All right. If neither side makes an error, it must end in a draw. But every human being, including the biggest grandmaster, the world champion, makes an error in deduction every time, almost every time, may succeed once in a while by chance. Hence, loses to a computer. All right. So that is there. Plus, even if you have a valid deduction, it is invalid knowledge. No, because they assume the axioms may not be true in the real world. I already gave you an example. And there are lots of other examples like the Banak-Tarski theorem of set theory, which uses the axiom of choice. And this says that if you have one ball of gold, you can cut it into pieces, finite number of pieces, reassemble them, and you will get two balls of gold of the same size, so you can become infinitely rich. Now, do you believe this nonsense? It's a theorem of set theory, and set theory is the basis of all formal mathematics as it is done today. But the point is, any nonsense proposition whatsoever can be proved as a formal theorem by selecting the axioms and properties. So what's the point in doing that? So the assertion is that it is contingent versus necessary truth. That Church said that logic binds God, who can create facts of his choice, but not an illogical word. So you believe that facts are contingent. God could create the facts of his choice. So you can have facts which are true in some Wittgensteinian words. Now, if you're talking in logic, you won't talk about God, you'll talk about Wittgenstein. So but the relation of axioms to theorems is a necessary truth which will be true in all words. That is a belief. It's a wrong belief. It's a wrong belief because it parochially assumes two-valued logic. But logic too can vary. So logic is not unique, not certain. Now I have this article from a long time. It's there in my 2004 book, Buddhist logic and Jain logic and so on, Syadvad, Buddhist Chatushkoti. So how do you decide logic? If you decide it culturally, then mathematical theorems are mere relative cultural truths. If you decide it empirically, then you have to look at quantum logic. So I've discussed it in great detail in my book, Quantum Logic Based on Structured Time. So it is not even truth functional. So you can have Schrodinger's cat both alive and dead at one given instant of time. And there is no contradiction. You cannot deduce anything you like from it. So the point is, how is logic to be decided? If I decide it empirically, there may be possible error. So I have to do it inductively. So deduction is already weaker than induction. Let me go to the conclusion. I hope I have not overstretched my time. That the church role in genocide, slavery, and racism has been ignored. It was first mandated. Genocide and slavery were mandated by the church in the bulls Romanus Pontifex and Inter Cetera. This was accepted also by Protestants and the US Supreme Court. Till today, it's not been changed. So the underlying dogma of extreme Christian superiority was justified using false history and a false history of science later from 12th century onwards. So what is the action that you need to do? Hold the church responsible for genocide plus slavery. I mean, you join the indigenes to condemn the church and demand that the church recant publicly. You don't want to kill anybody. Let them acknowledge their mistake publicly. And let them stop giving moral advice for at least another 500 years after having given such bad advice. About the history of science, recognize that false history of Greeks and science is a centuries-old church con trick. Don't fall for it. Okay, it's the basis of false claims of superiority as used by Kant to support racism. To overthrow it, you insist on primary sources for history. Learn to distrust Western authority. Don't trust people just because they are from Harvard or Cambridge, and don't trust Wikipedia at all. Ask for primary evidence. Use non-textual evidence to cross-check. You know, Greeks didn't know how they had a bad calendar. They didn't know how to write numbers. How could they have done this and that? And start your own courses in history, philosophy, or science in your country. I have designed one course, but you design your own. But please start it. Please take up the subject. It's not trivial. So as far as Euclid is concerned, it's an important symbol of the false history of math concocted during the Crusades. It's a total falsehood. Euclid did not exist, did not invent axiomatic proof, no axiomatic proof. So axiomatic reasoning is an invention of the crusading church, very convenient, but it is not superior. Convenient for Christian rational theology. It's not superior in any sense of the word. It has no practical value, no special epistemic value. So Euclid must fall. Destroying symbols is important, but not enough. Okay? So abandon Western formal math, which is an instrument to promote white Western authority, because you can't make your own axioms. Somebody make the axioms of set theory. Somebody decided how the calculus should be done with real numbers, and everybody has to do it. So start teaching practical normal math, which makes math easy, as I've demonstrated. For example, calculus without limits, or this traditional string geometry, which was done in India and Africa. I have a textbook on that for schools. String geometry for class 9, which is demonstrating how this was done. This text is available. So why for schools? Because calculus can be done in the universities, but school is where they start learning stuff, or decolonize statistics. I think I will stop at that point, since I have, well, I have completed 55 minutes almost. So this was a talk I gave at JNU on statistics for social science and humanities. So I will stop there. Thank you very much for patiently listening to me. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Raju, for that very powerful presentation. I mean, I think I speak for everyone when we say that your talk brought to our knowledge a lot of very important things that I'm sure people are going to discuss in this question and answer session we are going to have just now. So if you have a question, just raise your hands and I will call you. Please be brief. We don't have much time. So if you have questions, raise your hands. I can at least give us your question very briefly.
All right. Good morning, Professor Raju. Thank you very much for that very important and very exciting speech that you have given concerning Euclid and the Pythagorean theorem. I have two questions precisely. I read one of your essays titled Black Thoughts Matter, and there you decided to give a $3,300 prize to whoever can prove that Pythagoras actually existed.
Euclid,
I want you to please...
Euclid, yes, Euclid. Yeah. Pythagoras didn't exist, yes. That is taken for granted.
Okay, so I would want you to expatiate on that, because I wanted to know if people have actually attempted to prove and what you think is wrong with those proofs. The second question I would like you to also address is connected to my research, because I'm also into mathematics. And I'm arguing that the binary base 2 numbering pattern is actually linked with the divination pattern of many sub-Saharan African peoples. And this has also been credited to Gottfried Leibniz as well. I would want to know if you have one or two things to say about that. Thank you very much, Professor Raju.
Your first question, quite simple. I gave this prize in that I gave you the Goodbye Euclid video, and this was announced in front of the Malaysian Deputy Education Minister, and nobody has claimed it. Nobody has claimed the prize because, as I said, everybody knows that there is no primary evidence for Euclid. And David Fowler admitted it in the year 2002. He was the expert who knew the primary sources. But it is a big myth. And as I said, lots of people, including Needham and so on, or Gillings and so on, will keep talking about this myth as if the West did something superior. Now, your second question, I'm not quite sure I understood. Are you talking about the binary system? I didn't quite get your second question.
Yeah, the binary.
Binary system.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. The binary system. Now, I have not investigated that. I do know about the binary system being used in Indian texts, but you are talking about the Yoruba, right?
Yes,
so
yes.
I have not. I see history is too difficult thing for one person to do. I don't understand the local language. There's so many languages in the world. So it is a collective enterprise. You have to look, come out with things, and we can discuss and then write what needs to be done. So there are so many languages in the world. This is what I also used to tell my students. You please do something. I cannot do everything. I can only do what I know in my country, right? So it is your job to do this, right? All right. Thank you.
All right.
There are some questions in the chat. Are
Okay.
there? Just check.
Yes, I see Christiana Idika has her hand raised up. After Christiana, we'll go to Maduka Eyimba. So Christiana, you have the floor. Ask your very brief question.
All right. Thank you, Professor Raju, for this very engaging presentation, thought-provoking, at some point also so annoying. I will not explain what those things mean. It's not necessary. First is a remark. And that remark has to do with what you said about the cause. Instead of the cause of calm, I think it is the cause of harm.
Yeah.
It is not calm. So I want to correct that because of the audience.
Curse of Cam from Kemet. And it is also called curse of Ham. Now, exactly how you translated it is, it's not an error. It is called curse of Cam and also curse of Ham. So both the things are there, and you can check that out. So Cam from Kemet, and that is why black.
You are not, that brings me now to my next question, because we are talking about authority, okay? So, and you said quoting Western authority is what gives legitimacy or validity to an argument. So how do you justify your own authority in this context now?
I don't have any authority.
Let me
giving you arguments.
Let me finish.
I have no authority at all.
No, let me finish. I'm not talking about you, because the information you gave or the presentation and the argument you presented, I am sure when you are saying false history and what you are trying to do is to correct the false history. That means you are working with a book or a text or a history or source of wherever is the source of your data, because these things you are naming 6th century, 7th century, you were not there that time. So it must be, you must have gotten it from somewhere in order to back up your argument. Okay.
Yeah, I have primary sources. I have primary sources which are all cited. For example, when I talked of what was happening in the Crusades, I talked of Summa Theologica. And I gave you a primary source, which was Aquinas' Summa Theologica.
No, I am coming. You are not allowing me to finish my question. Yes. So my question is, given these primary sources, okay, how do you even validate the truth of the content of those sources? Okay, because it is the same argument that you used in terms of false presentations that you can find in some other texts. That is one. Second is that when you talk about foolishness, I wonder what you would say about Gandhi, who also had the same foolish concept about the Africans, okay, in this context of people using color to define superiority and inferiority, because Gandhi himself also argued that the Indians are superior to the blacks, whatever his reason for that. So I wonder if that foolishness is applied to Gandhi, okay, in that context. And finally, when you talked about the Islamic rational theology and church or Christian theology of reason, also you have to if you are looking, I don't know how authoritative those sources will be, but then how Muhammad emerged with the Islamic religion has nothing to do with rationality. Just like Christianity also can be, without reason, borrowing from non-existent Euclid, okay? The same thing is applicable to even Islamic religion, because it has no rational foundation from the perspective of Muhammad. So I would like you to comment on these things, on my observations anyway.
Okay, so regarding your first question, I not only talk, you can question my primary sources. Which primary source are you questioning? That's number one. You can't just say, you have something wrong with primary sources. No, you can't start with a belief. You have to be specific. I question this primary source of yours. You have not done that. So please be specific. That's number one. Number two, I don't go just by textual sources. I emphasized in my conclusion that you use non-textual sources. Where is the non-textual evidence that Greeks could do any basic arithmetic? They never had any algorithms. Where is the textual source? Where is the non-textual evidence? You have non-textual evidence of the calendar, that they were extremely bad. They had an extremely bad calendar. So use non-textual sources as well in order to cross-check. That's number one. Now, I didn't get your second question. Let me go to your third question, which was about rationality in Islam. It is well known that there is an Islamic rational theology. Why are you talking about Muhammad? You talk about the practice of Islam as it existed. And the theology, the rational theory, what you talk of Aristotle is based on the text of Averroes. What were the texts of Aristotle that are available in terms of Greeks? They are all texts of Averroes in Arabic, which actually he uses the word philosopher. He doesn't use the word Aristotle. It was just some hearsay where in Arabic they called it Arastu. So there is no rationality whatsoever here, but this rationality came because of this whole school of rational theology based on, with Averroes being one of the examples, and Al-Ghazali, who's supposed to be the counter to Averroes, actually does not deny. He writes a book on logic. So there is plenty of rationality in Islam, and don't just go on the basis of Muhammad. You know, what are you talking about? We are talking about the practice, right?
I think you got my three questions wrong.
How do we talk
You
about
got my three questions wrong. So I am sorry. You got my three questions wrong.
Christiana, please, thank you so much. We don't have much time, so please let's allow.
Yes, but
yeah, we can have a discussion with.
He didn't get my questions right.
And that's why the answer later. Can we discuss it later?
Yeah.
Somebody else has a question. Yes, please.
Yeah. Maduka, please ask your questions very briefly and straight to the point.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Arabia, for the opportunity, and also to Professor Raju for that exciting lecture. I have just two questions. Number one, in the course of the lecture, Professor Raju stated that racism is not about the color of the skin. He stated that very clearly.
Yeah.
And then along the line, he also mentioned three major superiority vested interests from the West, namely Christian superiority, Western white superiority. Why should white superiority be part of the vested interest if skin color is not part of racism, or racism is not about number one? Did you get that question now?
I didn't say it's not part of racism. I said it developed as part of, it's not the primary issue. It developed, the primary issue is the sense of superiority. All right? The primary issue is the question of superiority. And I'll come to Christina in a minute about Gandhi's foolishness you're talking about. So the question is about what is primary. If they said blacks are superior, you would not have a problem, would you? So it is something which develops later. It's something which develops later. And can I answer what Christina asked? I think that the thing which was written by this professor in Ghana, he has misquoted original text, totally misquoted. And it is shocking that people still believe it. I mean, you may have differences. I am not a supporter of Gandhi, but it is gross misquotation, gross academic, I mean, it's just third rate. That's all that I can say. It's complete misquotation, falsehood. Please read the sources. Yes, please. Somebody else has a question.
Thank you.
Dean had a question. Can we...
Isaiah Negedu, please, your question. I think that would be the last question before we have to move on.
Yes, thank you, Arabia. Professor Raju, you said there is no such thing as a self-evident proof. Can you please explain that?
Yeah, there was a thing that said once upon a time that axioms are self-evident truths. All right. Now, that is something which has been abandoned, because how do you agree on what is a self-evident truth? Because it is not even manifest. It is not even empirical. Okay, even if it's empirical, it might be fallible. So axioms are today accepted as postulates. This is textbook stuff in school. And it is not something which is to be assumed to be, which is something everybody accepts as true, but only something which is a postulate. So that is the simple assumption, nothing more than that. A simple point, nothing more than that. Nobody can agree on what is a self-evident truth. And there are no axioms like that anyway. And there are no axioms like that in Euclid. So you might have things like, there is only one line between 2 points, that is Hilbert's axiom, one straight line between 2 points, but that's not necessarily true. It depends on what you call a point and so on. I think the Dean had a question. Can we get to him?
Yes, the person listed as Dean faculty, could you ask your question? Very briefly, please.
Thank you very much, Arabia. Yes, this is a very powerful presentation from Professor Raju. I really enjoyed it. It's not only powerful, thought-provoking, but it is also disruptive. It's a follow-up to Maduka's question. Perhaps the professor may want to explain the disconnect between skin color and superiority, because I didn't quite get it, because personally, I don't see that disconnect. Because for me, I think everything begins with the skin color. And the skin color tells the host to say, I am special. And because I'm special, I should think differently from the other person with a different skin. So perhaps I think you may want to go further and explain why you think there's a disconnect between the skin color and the whole concept of superiority.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Now, I pointed out to Theodore Adam's work when he asked this question of what came first, whiteness or slavery. And the answer to that is very clearly, as I pointed out, if you are considering slavery is something that was promoted by the church. Not only in the sense that they had slaves, but in the sense that they thought it is very moral for people to have slaves. That was the initial point. Then at a later stage, it evolves, because after you have blacks converting to Christianity, after the transatlantic slave trade, then Christianity cannot be used to keep them enslaved, right? So what do you do? So they said there is a curse of Cam. And now once they have a curse of Cam, it is a very thin justification, because it's just one quotation from the Bible. And so what does Kant do? So therefore Kant goes to the secular justification. He says blacks are not created. All right, so the skin color comes at that point of time, that they are Christians, but they are inferior Christians because of the curse of Cam. They are inferior because of the secularly inferior, because they are not created. That is Kant's argument. And now I'm saying that that argument is based on false history, and I'm saying that false history is a basic trick that the church has been using from the 4th century, right from the time of Orosius. Now, publicly, they did not hide it in the 5th century. And Orosius writes, he did not hide. He says it's a good thing to tell lies in favor of the church. But this was hidden during the Crusades. So the skin color is there, but it's not the primary determining element, because when you go to colonialism, it's not just a skin color. Now they are talking about race in the context of Aryans, but it's the same thesis that the colonizer is superior. Why? Because the colonizers have superior science, have superior mathematics. So it's the same false history of science which is being used in all 3 cases of religious superiority, racist superiority, civilizational superiority. So I'm saying that let us look at this as part of a much, much larger problem, which includes the indigenous Americans, Australians, which includes the colonized. And then you see that a certain pattern is falling through, that what you need to attack is really the history of science, the false history of science, which has been given to us. That's my point.
Thank you, Prof. I think I'm answered.
Yeah, thank you so much. Even though we are running out of time, I can still take questions, because obviously this talk is a very good one, very interesting one, and people are willing to ask their questions. So I can see 2 other hands from Amara and Diana. So Amara first, then Diana next. Please ask your questions very briefly. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Prof, for your presentation. In your presentation, you seem to be in favor of us abandoning Western mathematics for indigenous mathematics. My question is, how can we implement this? That is my question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. Now, my argument is not for indigenous mathematics. My argument is for a better mathematics. I have made that clear hundreds of times. I'm talking about better mathematics. And I'm saying that the myth you have got from the colonizer that the kind of mathematics they do, the formal mathematics they do is better, is false. So I'm not saying that you do something just because it is indigenous. You do it because it is better. And calculus without limits is better. Simple thing is that nobody even understands what a real number is. In the Cape Town debate, I challenged the mathematician to prove 1 + 1 = 2 in real numbers. That challenge is still open. Please take a look at my JNU video. That's the premier university in India. And so I think that this is, it is a point that is being made that calculus without limits is better, but the formal mathematician will not come to debate. They will censor. They will not talk. I've been inviting them for a debate for so long. They will never discuss it. Now that I think is a problem because they know that they have nothing to say. And I think that is the issue. Just as in the case of Euclid, I offered the prize because they have nothing to say. And that is why for 1 + 1 = 2, I offered this prize of ₹1,000,000. So I think that this is, of course, that can be done. It's not like Euclid, it can be done, it's just very hard. And so therefore that prize was offered only for a limited amount of time. Now, I think that when you are looking at better mathematics, you need to examine what kind of mathematics you did. So for example, I told you about string geometry. Why don't you come and join my workshop? Or you take a look at my teaching of calculus without limits. Why do they tell lies? Why did your Cape Town people tell such terrible lies? If they have a solid argument, they should have come up with it. The moment people start telling lies, you know that they will have a weak argument. So not indigenous, better. Let's be very clear about that. If it is also indigenous, that's a different matter. I'm not saying you exclude something indigenous, but use it not because it is indigenous, but because it is better.
All right, thank you. Diana, your question.
Thank you very much, Prof. Raju, for your insightful presentation. I am still a bit confused about your explanation on the racism thing. I think for one, for me, racism works in two mutual reinforcing ways. Like we talk about skin color, and then we talk about the mindset that characterizes this idea of racism. So I still think you haven't really explained how this racism works. And if it is not from skin color, I think you've not quite given us that explanation that speak to the fact that it is not from the skin. Because even if we come down to Africa, we'll notice that people tend to privilege light-skinned individuals to black skin. So I think it is that understanding that it all starts from the skin. That is why we tend to also have this understanding of ourselves that black skin is not good enough. So I think you should give us more explanation why you think the skin color is not the problem, but the other way around.
Right. So let me go back to Theodore Allen's question. What came first? Whiteness came first or slavery came first? On what basis were blacks enslaved before the 16th century? Were they enslaved on the grounds that they were black? No. They were enslaved on the grounds that they were non-Christian. So the slavery came first. The idea of inferiority came first. And then when that idea could no longer be sustained, then the skin color was used as a quick visual clue. Is my point clear? I'm saying that was not the essence. Now I want to go to the next stage, that if you just stop with racism, you don't get a complete picture. You have to go to also to colonialism. And when you go to colonialism, it's no longer the issue of skin color, it's the issue of civilization. It was Christians first, whites later, and West subsequently. So it's a question of civilizational superiority. Now, I think the problem, I'm taking a much more general view of the problem, which is that there is a sense of superiority, and that sense of superiority is always based on one false history where the characters are slightly changed. So one time you talk of Christianity, sometime you talk of skin color, sometime you talk of civilization, but they are not unrelated, they are all just the same. That's the point I'm making. So what I'm saying is that you should not focus on that because there is a much bigger problem at hand, and you can tackle the bigger problem. It's much easier. If you just keep talking of skin color, the problem won't go away because I'm talking about cure for racism. So how do you cure it? You cure it by attacking that sense of superiority. It's just not about skin color. It's about the sense of superiority, which you destroy. And how do you destroy? You destroy it by destroying these silly myths, which are used to say this is superior, this is superior. You destroy those myths of history of science, and then there will be a major change. So this is what I'm saying, that if you just get stuck on skin color, you're stuck to one problem. Then you say genocide of red Indians, that's another problem. No, it's not another problem. It's part of the problem. Or you say colonization, it's another problem. So that's why I talked of Du Bois' dream that you have to bring together all the oppressed people, and you can't be looking at just that, okay, in one case it was skin color, in one case it was something else, in one case it was something else. There are 100 different causes, then you can't solve the problem. So my argument is, or my submission, if you like, is that you should consider the bigger problem, and then you find that there is a reasonable understanding and a reasonable solution.
Okay, thank you. Bjorn, okay, you would be the last questioner. And this time you'll be serious about you being the last. So Bjorn, your question very, very briefly.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's more a comment that really puzzles me and troubles me during the presentation, because I think the idea to talk about the reason why you argue for that kind of mathematics that you are arguing for is because of its inherent superiority seems very, very dangerous. I think this is one of the factors that was mainly responsible for the horrors of colonialism, this understanding of inherent superiority. Shouldn't we argue for diversity, for multiplicity of accounts, but and instead do not develop something that considers itself to superior to the former allegedly superior paradigm? I think this is a deeply troubling normative hierarchy that is foundational, as far as I understood it, for the argumentation that I've heard so far. And that I think that really troubles me. That was just a very brief comment. Thank you.
Okay, can I respond to that? I think that when you talk of diversity, where is the diversity? In the university syllabus, how do you teach mathematics? You teach it according to the calculus text. And they say real numbers, they say limits. You don't teach it any different way. So there is no room for diversity. So it's good to talk of diversity. How are you going to bring it in? First, at least make one simple change. So you are not able to bring in any kind of diversity. So merely talking of diversity from a very comfortable status quo is not going to convince anybody. It is like saying we are killing all the species and we should have diversity of species. So it is not an argument which helps me when I find that I am being oppressed. So first of all, we need to change. And now when you change, I'm saying I want to fly a rocket. What method should I use? Should I use, okay, lots of, there can be different methods, but ultimately I will use the method which works best. I can't say I wanted lots of different methods, and so one method will, rocket will go here, one will go there. It becomes too expensive to experiment. So I have to first check that out. And what I am saying is that the way you actually do it is what way you should do it, and not by appealing to theology which is there in the text. So we can't have mere diversity when there is hegemony. On one side you have hegemony, on the other side you talk of diversity. Let's at least introduce one alternative course in mathematics. I've been trying for 10 years. Try and do it. Where is the diversity? Just talk of ethno-mathematics. Talk of real mathematics that you're doing. So I think that you need to look at that. And once you look at that, that there has to be some comparison, all right? Some comparison of what is better, what is worse for a particular purpose. Maybe something could be better for some other purpose. But for a particular purpose, you are going to decide. And you have always decided that whatever the colonial master brought, that has to be true. Why? I'm challenging it. When you're talking of diversity, why don't we accept the challenge and debate? So let's have a debate and let us see for what purpose, what thing is better. That would be so much better. So let's start with Euclid. Let's at least destroy that myth if there is no evidence for it. Why are we talking about it? So I think that it is not a mere question of diversity, not a mere question of ethnomathematics. Why is Western ethnomathematics taught in all the universities? Are you going to have, you can have multiplicity of syllabi, I don't mind. But what have you done to change it? Has anywhere in the world one particular subject of mathematics been taught differently? Any university, give me one name. So there's no point in talking of diversity in some postmodernist sense, because that is an invitation for status quo. There are 5 billion truths, therefore do nothing, and therefore have status quo. Right? There is a problem there. All are equally applicable, therefore do nothing. So why do nothing? Let's first change the status quo, then we'll talk of diversity. When there is not even a single element, right? I think that's why.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you very much, Professor Raju, for your very, very insightful, thought-provoking talk today, your lecture today. It has lived up to our expectations, especially my expectations, having read a few of your articles and, you know, dying to meet you and hear you speak. It was a wonderful lecture. I want to thank members of the CSB who actively engaged with Professor Raju in his talk, and other audience members who asked questions and made comments. I can even see some comments in the chat box and all that. Thank you very much, Professor Raju, for agreeing to give us this talk, give this lecture, and for being part of this program. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much.